We were emptying Texas.
I'd like to call this January 30th special meeting to order. Can I get roll call, please?
Mrs. Buckley?
Here.
Mr. Kuderik?
Present.
Ms. Lanasi?
Present.
Ms. White?
Present.
Ms. Roscoe?
Here.
Mr. McKevich is president.
Present.
Here.
President Frayer, and I'm here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the next item on the agenda would be the presentation from MASB. At this time, Pete
Or
Yes,
Carl.
or Carl.
Or Pete.
Or both of you. Carl will be giving you a handout, and what it is, it's everything you're going to see in the PowerPoint presentation. This is a summary of the input that's been gathered both through the forums and through the meetings. And so Carl and I are here to share that with you tonight.
Thank you.
As it says, the input came both from the forms that were submitted by staff and community members and also from dialogue at meetings held from the various constituents, the various meetings that we had. I want to start just by showing you all the meetings that were scheduled. I'll tell you before I do that I'll show you like a total of the input that we got, that attendance was sort of, it depended on what the meeting was. Some were more well attended than others. There was a significant number of meetings which might have contributed to low turnout at some of them, but starting way back in December, met with the administrators, met here with the central office staff. The morning that it was scheduled to meet with administrators, the high school administrators, all three of them, they couldn't leave the building. Something was going on, so I went to them a couple days later and met with them to make sure the administrative staff all had a chance for input. Then met with the local 64 and parapro union leadership, met with the teachers union leadership. We had meetings scheduled also with the parent coordinators and PTA representatives. A couple of meetings where any staff could show up who wanted to. And on the 24th, an open meeting for any parents and actually anybody in the community and in the public that wanted to attend. All told, if you added up all the people at all these meetings and the forms that we received, what you're going to see is a summary of input from about 80 different individuals. To point out a couple things. Number one, purposely not going to break down and say, well, this is what the local 64 leadership said, and as opposed to what the parent group said versus what the administrators told us. First of all, there was a lot of things that were in common with everybody, but there was, within all the groups, there was some diversity of opinion. Some of them were rather small, and for reasons of confidentiality, to make sure that they felt free to say whatever they wanted to say. What you're going to see is really a summary. I tried to glean some things from all of the input and not necessarily break it down by group. So that's what this is here. There were many various opinions expressed, but what you're going to hear tonight are those that were expressed repeatedly. So let me start with a couple of general perspectives. One, those who did provide this input care an awful lot about this school district, about Romulus Community Schools. Even if they were coming from a little bit different directions and maybe were looking for something a little bit different, what was really clear is, first of all, just by the presence there, but also by some of the things they were sharing, that there is some real deep caring about this school community. The other thing is, despite some small differences on some things, really there was a lot of commonality in the opinions that we heard. There was one specific area where there was probably a strong disagreement, and we'll get to that towards the end of the presentation, but just wanted to let you know that more than not, there was a lot of common beliefs and opinions from the various people that I met with. So I tried to structure this a little bit to replicate some of the things that were on the form. So summarizing what folks thought current strengths were in this school district, that they wanted the next superintendent to recognize that and build upon, heard over and over the staff. sometimes specifically about the teaching staff, sometimes the administrative staff, often also about the support staff. But over and over, we kept hearing that this new superintendent, the next superintendent, should realize that he or she is walking into a situation where got a pretty decent staff in place. Heard a lot about the perception and the belief that Romulus right now has a challenging curriculum, and that they like that. The people that were talking to me like it a lot, and they want the new superintendent to recognize that what's there now is good for this school district. Two things about that. One, emphasis on the word challenging. They want somebody to come in here with some high expectations of the students here. And also the fact that there's a standardization of the curriculum throughout the district. Heard a lot of that too, that there was an appreciation of that and a hope that the new superintendent can recognize that and build upon it. Another thing that positive something going on here in Romulus that I heard more than once from the people that I met with were the support systems that are currently in place for Romulus students. They felt that there was a lot of time and effort and thought going into the support systems that are in place, and that there are some things that are working really, really well for Romulus kids right now. And again, the sense I got was to build upon these too, not meaning that none of these can change whatsoever, but just a feeling that these are some good things that they would like to see the type of superintendent that can help build upon. The technology infrastructure came up over and over, and the related programs in place dealing with technology. There was a lot of pride in the technology that's in the district. Again, not wanting it to be stagnant, not saying don't come in and leave it as it is, but recognize, they're hoping the new superintendent can recognize what is in place and build upon it. Also heard about the diversity of the community and the student population. Recognize that there are differences and different points of view and different ethnicities, and that in fact it should be valued and looked upon as a strength of the school community. Moving on then, asking the question, and more of these meetings sort of rambled more than I tried with taking the notes I did to try to categorize this for you a little bit. We didn't do it necessarily this much in order at the meetings themselves, but when we got to upcoming issues that the community and the staff felt the next superintendent will need to address, there's no surprise to anybody, but district finances over and over and over and over came up. And there were concerns about that recognizing that they want to make sure that the next superintendent recognizes that and has the capabilities to be able to deal with that. Lots of talk about what's going on throughout the state of Michigan, recognition that Romulus is not alone, and with the hope that whoever ends up being the next superintendent does have some expertise in that area. Changes in the district's administrative team. That kept coming up too. There's an understanding, obviously, that's out there that it's not just the superintendent, but you've got Tom and Ed that are going to be leaving from the central office, a number of building and program administrators and special education and adult education and community ed, and again, some of the buildings, some has already taken place, will continue this year and then again next year. So this is an issue that they feel that the next superintendent will need to address, and again, this is input really to the Board of Education. What you're hearing in all of these, there's a sort of a request to the board to say, consider this when you're looking for a superintendent, make sure it's somebody who's going to be able to meet these challenges and deal with these issues. Changes in the state's academic credit requirements. You know, that sort of changes by changes by the day, depending on, I'm sure Tom's in contact with folks in Lansing, but just the fact that it's changing so rapidly and that it may end up having a serious impact on the local curriculum, that's an issue that, again, everybody felt will need to be addressed. Class size kept coming up. That's a very specific issue, and with the understanding that it's also sometimes bargaining kind of relates to that too, but it did come up repeatedly from different groups that I met with, that they felt there was an issue that somehow, hoping somebody has some kind of creative idea, you know, now we get back up a slide and go back to district finances too, and it's going to be a little hard to juggle all of it, but that was definitely one of the issues. Compliance issues, such as NCLB. also came up, and understanding that the next superintendent will need to be abreast of some of the things like NCLB and the changing MEP requirements and need to be compliant with all this. Probably most of the discussion then in terms of the issues, probably more than any other area, we heard a lot about the kind of person that they felt that we need to see in the next Romulus superintendent. What are the characteristics that this person should possess in order to pull off all of the things we already talked about? And one of them is a caring for students. It just came through in all of the meetings. The focus of people's concerns was not just necessarily for, if it's a parent sitting there, obviously, not just for me, I happen to come to this meeting. It's not what you're going to do for me, but ultimately, what is this person going to do for students? I mean, I like to say, and you'll see a lot more characteristics. Caring is not enough. I like to say, I love my mother dearly, and she loves kids. I wouldn't recommend her to be the next superintendent of Romulus schools, though. No offense to my mother, but caring is not enough, and yet it does have to be there. The ability to relate well to others. Heard over and over, too, a people person. Somebody that can relate on a person-to-person level. Somebody with good communication skill. Now, some of these, as you know, you need to go with references and experience and doing some checking. Some of the things you'll be able to tell right from the interview. Obviously, one of them will be the communication skills. You're going to have, that's what an interview is. It's individuals coming and communicating with you as a Board of Education. So you'll be able to assess that one a little more easily, but also written communications. Heard a lot, and I didn't list all the sort of the subjects that could go to this. A lot like a good listener and also a good speaker. Listen to what people are saying, but then also articulate well what needs to be heard out here in the school community. Accessibility, approachability. Somebody who people don't feel frightened to just come up with, and that they felt would be approachable, that they could come up to and ask the questions that they feel needed to be asked. And along with that, visibility. So if you think about that, it's sort of like wanting something, and again, this is going to be quite demanding and a challenge to find somebody that meets all of these, but not just somebody, in essence, what I was hearing is somebody that we can go to, but then also somebody who'll come to us. And essentially that's what we kept hearing. The ability, this is sort of a two-parter, the ability to grasp the big picture. We kept hearing about vision, and also the ability to keep everybody focused on that vision. One of the things, a recurring sort of overall theme I kept hearing over and over and over, was one of the things that people liked what was going on is that there is, in terms of curriculum and instruction, there tends to be a system in place that's working pretty good, and that all the buildings are on board, and although they can try some building initiatives and put their own little stamp on the curriculum in a building, overall, more so than in some neighboring districts, there really are some commonalities that people are liking and seeing, and again, they perceive that to be the role of the superintendent, to keep everybody focused on that vision. A belief in the concept of team and the value of input. This came up especially when, well, actually in a lot of different issues, but it would sort of spring off often when we had discussions about the finances and concerns about what's coming up with finances. I kept hearing that from staff, parents, community. We've got some ideas. We've got some good ideas, with the recognition that it's obviously the Board of Education that needs to make the decisions, but the feeling that, knowing that the superintendent is going to make recommendations to you, they're looking for a superintendent that will listen to them also and listen to their ideas. Not just in the budget, but that was one area that kept coming up. Obviously, an excellent grasp of curricular issues. Somebody that knows what's going on, and it kind of ties in with what we talked about, the academic requirements that the state is now reconsidering. An understanding of school finances and the ability to develop financial options. Heard, and again, without putting all the specific things on here, all sorts of, we're getting into some specifics, and I kind of said, well, save it for the next superintendent to give the ideas, but specific ideas even on debt retirement and all sorts of good things, and whether or not they our viable ideas, the feeling that they need somebody here, their feeling is looking ahead into the future and what's coming, that can help develop some financial options for this school district. And when it came to the understanding of school finances, I didn't necessarily, sort of heard a little variance of opinion, not so much that it have to be somebody who actually comes from a financial position, but even more important, an understanding of the recommendations to be made to the Board of Education, the ones that are truly going to save some money in the long run and not just be a quick fix, the kinds of recommendations financially that are going to be less hurtful to the school community, that aren't going to impact kids as much as others, but somebody with an expertise, obviously, in that area also. This came up over and over. I mentioned it before, sort of in a different way when they talked about the curriculum, but here also when they were talking about the person, somebody who would have high expectations for students, staff, parents, and community. Now notice, this was coming not with students, but this was coming from the staff, the parents, and the community. They did not run away from that. You could probably, you could look at all the bulleted items up to now and say, wow, it's a little bit demanding, sort of what you're hearing from people. It's quite a challenge to find somebody. And yet they're also saying, we want somebody who's going to be demanding of us also. Somebody who's not going to be condescending and sort of look down to us, but really have high expectations for us. And I really respected that, coming from the staff and the parents and community members themselves, saying, have high expectations for us also. Good critical thinking and problem-solving skills. You know, we talked about some specific issues, and if not the particular knowledge or expertise in every single one of those areas, the feeling was that, but if you have somebody with good critical thinking and problem-solving skills, they're going to help lead this district through perhaps some difficult times. Responsiveness is another trait, another characteristic. Somebody who will be responsive to the needs and desires and questions that are out there. And we had interesting discussions. Responsiveness doesn't always mean agreement. You know, you can get a response, and the response might not be the one you like, but and they seem to understand that, the people I was speaking with about this particular issue, but they want to continue that, just the idea that we will get responses. Obviously, the district here has a history with some strong union activity. Well, going way back to a day, I remember people who used to work here and were involved in the unions, but experience with labor unions and bargaining, and a desire to strive for labor peace. It was interesting, sort of the way that was described sometimes. It doesn't mean at any cost. And notice the word is desire. Somebody who actually wants it. Now, you can't always get it, maybe. Hopefully, that's the goal. But frankly, there are in some situations. I've worked in some areas where that is not in the forefront. It's like there is no value placed in it. And what I heard from, again, more than once, more than twice actually, was that at least somebody who realizes that would be good if it's achievable. The issue of diversity came up again, and the feeling that somebody should have some experience and a belief in diversity as a strength. The emphasis here was on experience, because the feeling was that everybody is going to come and say the right things at an interview. Oh yes, of course, I love a diverse population, but they're looking for hopefully somebody that's actually had some experience in that area. And finally, out of all these characteristics, the issue of honesty and integrity came up. Somehow, it seems to sort of go without saying. That's what you look for in every school employee, everybody from the top down, but especially at the top, we heard about the importance of honor and integrity in a superintendent. Now let me spend a couple minutes now and talk about the one area of divergence, is what I called it, an area where opinions seem to differ kind of strongly, and that was hiring a candidate from the inside versus hiring a candidate from the outside. It came up with every single group that I met. That issue came up. And here is the range of opinions that I heard. I heard that the next superintendent should definitely come from within the district. I heard that the next superintendent should definitely come from outside of the district. I also heard that outside candidates should be considered, but you should give preference to the inside candidate. And that sometimes when we would actually have a little bit of a dialogue, well, but what if there was an outside candidate? Well, okay, but we prefer the inside candidate. And on the other hand, some that were preferring the outside candidate, you give certain scenarios, it's like, well, that might work, but I still think you should go more to the outside than the inside. And we also heard that it doesn't matter, that the board should hire the best available person regardless. I heard each and every one of these opinions more than once repeatedly, and it was very interesting. These are what I think people focus on, a summary of what they focus on. Those preferring an outside candidate, they talked about the value of fresh ideas, new perspectives, needed to tackle upcoming issues. When you look at all those issues, the feeling was, you know, we're going to need somebody with some fresh ideas, new perspectives. Those talking about an inside candidate talk more about, focus more on some of the things that are already happening and the need for continuity and stability. The goal actually is to focus, I think, as a Board of Education, look at those fresh ideas, new perspectives, continuity and stability. And what you're really looking for, somebody who can bring fresh ideas, new perspectives, while having the ability to desire to maintain continuity and stability where needed. My point is this, it's going to have to be an either-or decision. You're going to hire a superintendent, and either it's going to be from inside or outside. It doesn't mean that the needs of the community and the staff, the various needs, cannot somehow be addressed. Because when you go dig a little deeper and you look at what are their interests in having either an inside or an outside, the goal, and I know it's a challenge and it's not easy, is to try to do, in essence, all of the above. My message was the same to everybody. All candidates are welcome to apply. And I said, and I'm getting no movement on the computer. Here we go. Whether they're in, whether they're out, or I even said, even if they were upside down, it doesn't matter. If you're interested in being the next Romulus superintendent, please apply. And I did, you should know I heard some of that too. Well, I think it's obvious that, you know, they don't want an inside candidate. And I also heard, well, I think it's pretty obvious that they already know the inside, and my message has been clear over and over and over. Right now, there are no candidates until you receive them on when the window closes on March 8th. And we're trying to encourage anybody and everybody who's interested to apply. So to sum it up, the next superintendent of Romulus schools should be skilled, experienced, caring, charismatic. It will keep a focus on Romulus students. As we said when we met the very first time, it was actually a couple months ago now, I think. You know, I always look at it a little bit like a puzzle piece, though. Not just that there's this generic good superintendent out there that will fit in every district in the state of Michigan, but you want somebody that's going to be a good fit for Romulus. So you want all of the above, and again, somebody that's going to provide a good fit for this proud and caring school community. I said it's like a piece of a puzzle, and so a little reminder, I put the puzzle piece right there, sort of bring all the various things you heard here tonight together in your search for the next Romulus superintendent. And with that, are there questions? Got everything in front of you. It's been a very interesting couple of months.
I think that was some pretty good feedback. Are there any questions, Naima?
I just have a question, and it's outside of the presentation, and I can't remember if we discussed it or not. Did we talk about having, I know we talked about having something for the board, but something with staff and administrators when agencies or something like the district undergoes a transition or a change, because change is hard for people to deal with, and I don't think we even looked at that part of that. So is that something we
After the
need?
superintendent is hired, you're
Yes,
saying?
after the superintendent is hired, transition workshop, change workshop, or something for the employees. You have to do that.
And that's a good point. And I think what you have before you now is the minimum selection criteria that you put together for the brochure that came from the board.
Mm-hmm.
You have the information that is garnered by your staff and constituent. As you can see, if you compare them up, they're not all that different as you
Right.
look at the kinds of
Right.
things. And so, to answer your question directly, I think we've got a couple options as we make the selection, because we have, and you're really way ahead of the curve because you and your foresight started the process early. Joel's going to be with us until August, and there's going to be a transition period of time here where I think, as we mentioned earlier, the key thing is to find the history about Romulus, what's good, what's worked, what hasn't worked, those kinds of things. And then, once that's in place, then I think there is obviously room for a transition period, and maybe we take this a step further, like this community input kind of thing, and once a new person is on board, we do some more of that as a orientation, if you will, for lack of a better word, to introduce the new superintendent to staff, community members, and get a same type of input for the new person. Now that could be one possibility. And you know, there's probably many other ways to do that that I, not thinking about right now, but that could be an option once we get that person on board, have some time for that transition, get that history piece learned, because that's very, very important, and then go and listen and listen and listen before that person is on board for good. And you folks, as board persons, are invaluable resources for the new person, whoever he or she might be, because you all represent constituents within the community who have provided input during the process and will continue to provide it to you as we go through this process and interview people and so on. So I think there's a number of ways, and we can talk about those as we go through. But the value of this exercise that we've had with your staff and constituents and with you is that it really will give you an idea of what to look for as we review the paperwork and so on of those candidates. In your mind, will they fit? And Pete mentioned it earlier. Will they become part of that puzzle and be a fit for us to get the round peg in the right hole, if you will? And then it also gives us an opportunity, because what we've learned and what we know about you, it'll help us as we develop questions for the interview process. So we can hit and highlight on these kinds of things that are of interest to us, so the person can share stories with you about how, in fact, their experiences would relate to what we want in the new superintendent. So that's really one of the real major purposes of our listening to you and to your staff and so on. So we can, as we go through that process, we can develop questions that'll bring out those characteristics, so you can make a determination if or not that person would be part of that puzzle. So it's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think there are some ways that we can work together and do that once that person's named.
Okay.
Am I getting?
Yeah, you're getting there. I just want to make sure as a board we don't overlook that part of the process, because that's just critical. I mean, that's for anybody in a working in this change, and your boss is gone, the manager's gone, and somebody's new, coming in with their new ideas and the way they do things. It's an adjustment for everybody.
And that orientation piece is really important, and that's where you and Joel can be very valuable to that new person. As I mentioned, that history piece, and the kinds of things that have worked in the past, and the kinds of things that we hold dearly, if you will, as an organization and as a community. And those are the things, there are some untouchables, as an example, when you come into a new position. There are some things you just don't get at right away without getting a lot of input and a lot of understanding. So I think those things are real important in that transition period, as you mentioned.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, so our next course of action is to now just wait for the applicants to submit their applications, and then we will do our review, our screening on the 15th.
Right.
And March 8th is the deadline.
Right. And so that'll give us time after the 8th for us to review and our staff to review, because remember, we're going to do a little bit of paper screening for you, and we're going to send some to you, and then we're going to bring all the that's why there's like 7 days between, so you can have an opportunity to come in and review all the applicants before we go through that screening. Pardon me? Oh yeah, we've got 3 or 4 in right now, so they're starting to come in, and candidates are great procrastinators. They wait till the last minute kind of thing, normally. So,
Madam Chair, I have another question. So, looking at the revised timeline, what dates do board members need to make themselves available on this schedule?
Well, the screening night,
And that's March 15th.
right,
It's a
that's
Wednesday.
important.
Okay.
That'll be in the evening, right?
It's a Wednesday.
Thanks,
Do we want
Joe.
to set up a time?
The screening time, yeah, and we
We
probably,
need
that,
to
is
do
that a
that.
special meeting? 15th?
Clearly, that would be a.
I think so.
Okay,
Right.
well, you pick the time you want. You want 6 o'clock? You want
6 is
6:30?
fine.
6 o'clock, good
Six-
for everyone?
6 is good.
This is good?
Okay.
6 o'clock on, because we'll need to post that.
Okay.
All right, 6 o'clock. Then, at that time, after we screen and invite the candidates, we'll set, or well, actually, after we screen, before we invite, we'll set the interview schedule. And what we've just put down in here is the week of the 20th. So we kind of set that week aside, depending on how many you want to invite and when, then we'll set the nights at that time. You know, it might be weekend, might be night, whatever is convenient for you as a board. Because we've got, yeah, that's why we went that later, because of the,
In March, our meetings are the 13th and the 27th,
okay,
our regular meetings.
okay. Is the 15th okay for a special meeting then?
That's a
I'm-
Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm assuming, yeah, because I think we talked about, but during that week of the 20th for initial interviews,
Have
and then
evening interviews, is that what you said?
whatever you decide as a board. If you want to have them on a Saturday and Sunday, that's an option. If you want to have them during, you know, if during the week works better for you, that's, you know, that's whatever you want to do. But that's why I just put the week of the 20th, because schedules may change. I mean, we could just say they're going to be the 20th, 21st, and 22nd right now, but circumstances might change on your part between now and then, and that just gives you a little more flexibility, I think, if we determine that on the 8th when they're going to be. Does that make sense or not?
It would probably make more sense.
Yeah, that makes more sense for me. I need to,
Yeah, because then you'll have your
Let me check
schedules
my
and,
calendar
you know,
and
we
look.
can kind of coordinate that and get them the way we want. And then the same thing with the 27th, during that time, we'll say, okay, because normally what we do, of course, it depends on the candidates, but usually we like to have a second interview and a district visitation. We might want to have the district visitation before the second interview, but that's going to determine a little bit about who, what, when, and where, and we'll have a whole lot better idea after that, you know,
Okay.
initial time. And then, basically, you know, the April 3rd, I thought that was a meeting, regular meeting, is it not? No. Okay, by then, anyway, we might just want to push it to your regular meeting for, you know, we can announce somebody by the 3rd, but we wouldn't have the initial contract until your regular board meeting.
Which would be the 10th.
Yeah.
Actually,
Could
we're
we
we
wait
gonna,
take on
after we
it?
came back from,
I thought
That's
we
right,
were
that's when the
Chicago.
convention
We're
is
gonna be
doing
gone.
it.
Yeah,
the
I
one-
think
so
that's
it'll
why
be
you
after that.
changed to the 3rd, I
That's why we
thought.
decided
I think
to
you're
do it
right.
on the third.
No, you're right, you're
Yeah,
right,
I think you changed it because of the national.
you're right.
Yeah, we did.
So by then, hopefully, that would be our thing. So those are kind of your commitments.
okay.
And we're real excited. We think, you know, it's a great district, and we think we're going to get you some pretty good candidates. So, any other questions? We're done, basically.
Okay. Are there any more questions of the board members?
Madam President, I just wanted to make a comment, quickly looking at some of the surveys that came in from the community and different groups that couldn't make their meetings, how similar their responses were to ours when we did ours beforehand. So it seems to be a lot of thinking along the same lines.
I might ask Carl or Pete to comment. You've been given several articles. These fellows were involved in some of those articles. I think Carl may even be quoted in one of them. But there are several articles there, and I would certainly recommend that everybody read those. I think you may have gotten magazines already, but if not, we copied the articles for you, so it will just give you more basic background as you make a decision. You notice in there, it has me doing very little, if anything, to be helpful. So that's what I'll do at this point.
Where, what will happen, just for the board's edification, is that once people are selected for the interviews, they're going to ask a lot of questions of Joel and your staff and so on, and they'll really do a lot of digging. Most of them will visit the community visit the school district prior to that interview. So there'll be some, an opportunity for your staff to provide some input for them, and they'll do that. I mean, the candidates will, they'll ask for probably annual reports, maybe even audits, so there's going to be some things that we are going to need from your staff for the candidate, because the good candidate will want to know as much or more about you than we want to know about them initially, so they can, make some determinations too. Because the key thing that we got to remember is that candidates are looking at us just as well as we're looking at them. So the good candidates are going to do a lot of homework prior to them coming and interviewing with you. So, which is a good thing. Because then that helps, and so that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from board members?
I have a question.
Ms.
April.
Fresco?
Now, are we going to see the paperwork before the 15th of March? Are you going to fax it to us, or
yes.
get them in packets to us so we get time
Yes,
to read them and
you
go
will
over
have
them all?
packets. You will have packets to your home.
Okay.
And then we'll have all of the credentials will be brought here probably like on the 9th, and they'll be with your people in the office. So if if you want to look at every candidate that came in, they'll be here available to you before the 15th.
Okay.
So you'll have 7 days, 7 days, that you'll have access to everything if you desire to look at each and every one of the candidates. Because there'll be some candidates. Our purpose for a paper screen is to, because there are going to be some people who may not meet your criteria. That the kinds of things we're looking at. But that doesn't mean that they're not a person that you might want to interview, as an example. So if you look at all the paper and there's somebody in there that maybe not in the pre-screen paper under a paper screen, but you as a board may really know that particular candidate, want to talk to them, that's okay. Put them in the mix to be interviewed. So you have an option to look at everybody, yes.
Okay.
Carl, earlier you brought up the idea you'd probably come down to about 6 candidates. There are some searches going on around the state as we speak, and in a number of those cases, a number of people are withdrawing before the search narrows itself down. Can you help us with that one?
Well, that's a difficult one, and there's a couple reasons that happens. And I'm only talking about experiential to share with you, because it's not a very good deal when that happens for anybody. But what normally happens is maybe the candidates haven't done enough homework about the position that they're seeking, and get into it after the interview and say to themselves, this may not be exactly what I thought it was. So, or maybe they see the handwriting on the wall and know they're not going to be a real candidate and elect to withdraw prior to having a rejection, as an example. So there's a couple variables that enter into that. And that's why I think it's real important, and that what Pete and I will do once we select as a board who we want to interview, our first response to the candidates on an invitation is, you've been invited to interview. Are you still interested in the position, and would you take the position if you were offered it? Because there's no sense going through a process and wasting your time or your community's time as a board with a candidate that really isn't interested in us. So we ask that question right up front and try to pin them down. And granted, you're not going to get 100% probability that person would take it. But if we ask the question, pose the question, it's a little more difficult for them to go through that as you get to that. And I think that's what Joel's talking about isn't usually the norm. Usually when we ask people to interview, they're in for it, and they go after it. Now, every once in a while there's some extenuating circumstances that pop up, but I don't think that's the norm, especially if we do a good job screening as a board and the candidates that we're really interested in. That's why if we only think there's 4 candidates that we're really interested in, maybe we'll only interview 4, as an example. 6 is just a number that is a norm, but there are, we can interview as many or as few as we want to. And there again, that's going to depend on types of candidates we have.
I just wanted to make comment. The article that was passed out was from the Ann Arbor Press, probably Thursday of last week, I think it was, where they've got listed here 21 superintendent positions open as of right now. I was at a meeting in Wyandotte this morning, and there was a lot of talk that there's a few superintendents in this surrounding area that have already not been offered contracts for next year, so that this number is probably higher than 21 already. And there was a lot of talk from legislators that were at this meeting about the new curriculum. They don't feel that the stuff is going to be in place by March to have it start with the incoming freshmen of next September. They just say there's not enough time in Lansing, and there's not enough, well, there's plenty of bickering going on, I guess, is the problem. So just kind of keep your eyes open, because things in Lansing are not progressing as well as they thought on curriculum. There's a lot of talk about the fingerprinting situation and the cost to the districts for that. And there was a superintendent there who was talking about, I can't remember if it was a parapro or whatever, but a part-time position in his district, the person would have to work a full week to cover the cost of the fingerprinting. And, just trying to get the state to realize how much money they're trying to pull out of either the employee or the district just to cover all this fingerprinting.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for conducting that for us.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion.
At this time, the next item would be adjournment.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Support.
Motion by Mrs. White, supported by Mrs. Roscoe. Are there any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.